The air in the penthouse suite of the Meridian Tower was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive cologne, a scent that now turned Charlotte's stomach. It was a scent that belonged to a life she no longer inhabited, a ghost of a perfume from a woman who could walk. She stared at the city sprawled beneath her, a glittering tapestry of power and ambition that she had once commanded. Now it was just a view, a cruel, static painting from a prison of her own skin. It had been 18 months since the private jet, a mere speck against the vast, uncaring sky, had fallen. It had fallen, and with it, Charlotte Sterling's world had shattered. Not just the bones in her back, not just the delicate column of her spine, but her identity. She was Charlotte Sterling, the CEO, the shark, the woman who could silence a boardroom with a single glacial stare. She was the one who made the deals that moved mountains, who decided the fates of thousands. And now she couldn't even decide when to scratch her own nose. She was a prisoner in a body that felt like a leaden tomb. The only movement she could command was the subtle turn of her head and the workings of her mind, which cruelly remained as sharp and ferocious as ever. It was a mind that now circled endlessly in a vortex of rage and despair, a predator trapped in a cage it couldn't escape. The door to her suite hissed open, a sound that was supposed to be soothing but which she had come to dread. It was the sound of the next indignity, another medical professional, another therapist, another person paid to tell her that everything was going to be all right, their eyes filled with a pity they couldn't quite hide. Pity. The very word was acid in her soul. She had never pitied anyone in her life. She had respected strength, tenacity, results. Pity was for the weak. "Ms. Sterling," a crisp, professional voice announced, "your new in-home care specialist is here. I have his file." Charlotte didn't turn her head. She couldn't. The cityscape was her only audience. "I don't want another one," she said, her voice a cold, clipped monotone. It was the same voice she'd used to fire executives. It held no tremor, no vulnerability. It was a fortress built of ice. "Respectfully, Miss Sterling, you have no choice. The agency requires you to have a primary caregiver," the woman said, her voice tinged with the frustration of someone used to being obeyed. A contemptuous snort escaped Charlotte's lips. "Requires? How quaint. Let the agency know I'll be filing a lawsuit for breach of privacy and harassment. Now get out." She heard the woman's sharp intake of breath. "As you wish, Miss Sterling, but I must inform you the new specialist is already here." "Then tell him to go home." "He won't leave," the woman said. "He's stubborn. His name is Leo Vance." The name meant nothing to her. A name for another parasite who would try to pick the flesh from her shattered bones. For weeks they'd come. The polite ones, the encouraging ones, the ones who thought they could fix her with a smile. She had broken them all. She had used her intellect, her barbs, her sheer, overwhelming presence to reduce them to tears or to blinding fury, just to watch them walk away. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Send him in. Let's get this over with." The door opened again, and this time the footsteps were different. They were heavier, more deliberate. Not the soft, padded steps of a nurse, but the solid tread of a man who wasn't trying to be quiet. She waited for the chirpy greeting, the saccharine good morning, the tone of forced positivity that made her want to scream. She didn't get it. A figure moved into her peripheral vision. A big man, built like a retired linebacker, with a thick, salt-and-pepper beard and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was wearing a simple flannel shirt and worn jeans, a stark contrast to the starched white uniforms of her previous handlers. He didn't sit in the chair beside her bed, the one designed for therapeutic conversation. Instead, he stood by the window, looking out at the very same cityscape she had been despising. "Nice view," he said, his voice a low rumble. No preamble, no hello, just a simple observation. Charlotte seethed. It's a city. It's steel and glass and concrete. It's a monument to the futility of ambition. Are you here to hold my hand, or are you here to get a skyline tour? Because if you're here for the latter, I can arrange for a better angle from the roof. I've heard the pavement looks lovely from up there." The man, Leo, didn't flinch. He didn't even turn around. He just let out a low chuckle, a sound without humor, more like a puff of air. You know, in my line of work, I meet a lot of people, a lot of angry people, but you've got a doctorate in it. Is that what you've become, Miss Sterling? Just a collection of sharp edges? Charlotte's breath hitched. It was the first direct, unflinching statement anyone had made to her that wasn't a clinical assessment or a platitude. It was an accusation. I am what my life has made me, she shot back. What I've had to be to survive. And you, Mr. Vance, are not here to psychoanalyze me. You're here to be a glorified, overpaid servant. He finally turned, fixing her with those stormy eyes. You're wrong. I'm not here to be a servant. I'm here because my son is in a school that costs a small fortune, and this job pays 3 times more than the last one that almost broke my back. I'm here because I need the money, plain and simple. I'm not here to be your friend, your savior, or your punching bag. I'm here to do a job. You need something done, I'll do it. You want to call me names, I've got a thick skin. You want to hurl insults, I've heard them all before, probably better ones. I don't care. But the one thing I won't do is treat you like you're fragile. The sheer audacity of it left her speechless for a moment. He didn't see her as the CEO. He didn't see her as a victim. He saw her as an obstacle. He walked over to a small cabinet and opened it, revealing a row of her medication. He picked up the blister pack and studied it. What's this one for? The pain in your back or the pain in your head? Neither, she hissed. It's a tranquilizer, for the time when the urge to scream becomes too much for the staff to bear. He grunted, putting the pack back. I can see that. The one who just left looked like she was about to cry. You get a kick out of that, don't you? It's one of the few things I can still do, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It was a confession she hadn't meant to make, and it terrified her. Leo didn't acknowledge the vulnerability. He just walked to the large, flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. You watch this thing. No, she said. The news is the same. The stock market is a circle of greed. Everything is noise. He walked over to a bookshelf, his finger trailing over the spines. They were all business books, biographies of industrialists, treatises on market strategy. No fiction. Fiction is a waste of time. It's just lies prettied up. He let out that low chuckle again. You'd be surprised. Sometimes the biggest lies are the ones we tell ourselves. He pulled out a thick, worn book from a leather satchel he'd set down by the door. It was a tattered copy of Moby Dick. You ever read this? I read it in college. A man obsesses over a whale. The whale wins, pointless. Maybe, he said, settling into the chair by the bed. He didn't look at her, he just opened the book. Or maybe it's a story about a man who let his hate consume him until he was more monster than the monster he was hunting. He began to read aloud. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. His voice was a deep, soothing baritone, and the words she'd long forgotten, seemed to resonate in the sterile room. She wanted to tell him to stop, to shut up, to get out. But the words were a lifeline. It was the first time in 18 months that someone had spoken to her mind, not her condition. It was the first time she wasn't being talked at, but being spoken to. For 3 days, this was their dance. He would arrive, he would perform his duties with quiet, efficient hands that were surprisingly gentle, and then he would pull out that battered book and read. He read about the Pequod, about the madness of Ahab, about the vast, terrifying emptiness of the sea. He didn't ask her how she felt. He didn't try to get her to talk about her feelings. He just filled the silence with a story of obsession, and she found herself hanging on every word. On the 3rd day, after he'd finished a chapter and was putting the book away, she spoke. Why are you really here, Leo? He paused, his hand on the book's cover. I told you, the money. Bull, she spat, the word sharp as a broken glass. I've been surrounded by people my whole life who wanted something from me. Money, power, connections. I can smell a lie from a mile away. You don't look at me like I'm a wallet. You look at me like I'm a problem to be solved. He sat back in his chair, the leather creaking. He looked at her, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. "All right, you want the truth. My son's mother, she checked out a long time ago. It's just me and Eli. And Eli, he's a good kid, smart kid, but he's different. He doesn't fit in. He's just like his father, too quiet, too observant. The world, it chews up men like us and spits us out. I work 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads, and I barely see him. And I'm scared, Miss Sterling. I'm scared that in a few years he'll be a statistic, a good kid who got lost in the system." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I came here because this job pays enough that I can quit the other one. I can actually be there for him when he gets home from school. But you're a different kind of problem. You've been handed the worst card in the deck, and instead of fighting, you've decided to flip the table. You're like Ahab hunting your own ghost." The comparison stung because it was true. Her ghost was the life she'd lost, the woman who'd commanded empires. She was chasing it, filled with a hatred for the world that had dared to take it from her. "So I'm a charity case now," she sneered. "A pit stop on your path to being a better father." "No," he said, his voice hardening. "You're a stubborn, bitter woman who has the mental fortitude to conquer the world from a goddamn bed, but instead chooses to wallow in her own misery. That's not charity. That's a waste." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'll be back tomorrow. I'll be here to do my job. If you want to hear the rest of the story, I'll read. If not, I'll just sit here. But you can't scare me away, Charlotte. I'm too tired and I've got a lot more to lose." He left, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. Charlotte lay in the silence, the echo of his words ringing in her ears. A waste. No one had ever dared to call her that. He was right. She had the power of her mind, a weapon sharper than any sword, and she was using it to run herself aground. That night she lay awake. Her mind, for the first time in months, wasn't on the past. It was on the present, on the future, on the father and son struggling to survive out there, on the fact that her empire, even as she'd abandoned it, was still running. The board, the executives, they were still making decisions. Decisions she was furious about because she wasn't there to dictate them. She had kept tabs, of course. She had a tablet rigged to the wall with a voice-activated interface. She could still read the financial news, the company memos, the whispers of a takeover that her supposed allies were orchestrating behind her back. A thought, cold and sharp as a scalpel, cut through the fog of her despair. Why was she letting them do it? Why was she letting herself be erased? The next day, Leo arrived. He didn't ask how she was. He just got her comfortable, made sure her medications were set, and then sat down with the book. "Wait," she said, her voice croaky from disuse. "Before you start, I need a favor." He looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "What kind of favor?" "I have a satellite phone in my closet. It has a specific line. I need you to dial a number for me." His brow furrowed. "I thought you didn't care about the world out there." "I don't," she said, the lie tasting like ash. "But the world out there has apparently decided I'm dead and buried. I'd like to remind them otherwise." He hesitated, then walked to her closet. He found the phone and brought it to her, holding it to her ear as she spoke the numbers. The line clicked. A voice answered, cautious and professional. "Hello." Charlotte's voice, when she spoke, was a blade of ice and authority. "This is Charlotte Sterling. Patch me through to the legal department. I have a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty to file." She dictated a series of commands, her mind working at lightning speed. She had been a master of corporate warfare, and now she was wielding her only weapon, her intellect. For the next hour, she orchestrated a counterstrike against the board members who were trying to push her out, using the very information they thought she couldn't access. Leo stood by, holding the phone, watching her with an expression of bewilderment and grudging respect. When she was done, she closed her eyes. "We've just started a war," she whispered. "Seems like you're winning it," Leo said, placing the phone back on the nightstand. She opened her eyes and looked at him. He didn't see a broken woman. He saw a commander. It was a small shift. But it was everything. The next week was a blur of controlled chaos. With Leo as her hands, she began to rebuild. He would hold the tablet for her, scrolling through documents and email threads. He would make calls for her, relaying her instructions. He was her proxy, a role that was initially mechanical but quickly became something more. He wasn't just her hands, he became her eyes and ears. But his yes, ma'am, and quiet efficiency started to feel less like servitude and more like a partnership. He started to anticipate her needs, not just medically, but tactically. He'd have documents ready before she asked for them, and he'd read the summaries of corporate email threads to her in his deep, resonant voice, highlighting the key points she needed to know. She learned about his son, Eli, how the boy loved to draw but was terrified of judgment, how he was being bullied at school. Leo would talk about him in the off hours, not as a complaint, but as a man trying to navigate a world that wasn't built for a soft-spoken, artistic boy. Their relationship had become a strange symbiosis. He gave her a purpose, a reason to engage with the world. She gave him a lifeline, a financial security that allowed him to be present for his son. Then the accident happened. It was a Tuesday. The first of the summer rain was lashing against the windows. Leo was pouring her a glass of water when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went white. His hand started to tremble and the glass clattered to the floor, shattering on the marble. "Leo," she said, alarm cutting through her voice. "What is it?" He couldn't speak. He just stared at his phone, his body shaking. "It's Eli," he finally choked out. He was crossing the street, some kid on a bike. He didn't see him. They're taking him to the hospital. He's bleeding from his head." The words hung in the air, thick with terror. For a moment, time stopped. This was his life, his world, his heart. The boy he'd been working so hard to save, and it was crumbling in the rain on a forgotten street. Charlotte's mind, a machine honed for crisis, went into overdrive. "Go," she commanded, her voice a whip. "Go now. What hospital?" "St. Jude's," he said, his eyes glazed with fear. "But I can't leave you, I can't." "Don't be an idiot," she snapped. "Go to your son, I'll be fine, I'll call my personal physician. He'll send a nurse, but you need to be there. Now, go." He looked at her, a desperate man on the precipice of losing everything. He ran out the door, leaving the penthouse in a deafening silence. Charlotte was alone. The rain beat against the windows, a frantic drumming. She tried to stay calm, but her mind wouldn't stop. It conjured images of Eli, a boy she'd only seen in pictures, bleeding on a cold hospital gurney. She thought of Leo, a man so full of quiet strength, who was now a wreck of fear. A father facing his worst nightmare. A knot of cold, profound fear formed in her stomach, not for herself, for them. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Charlotte Sterling was terrified for someone other than herself. The feeling was alien and overwhelming. Hours crawled by. She made the call to her doctor and a nurse arrived, but it wasn't the nurse she needed. She needed to know. She tried to call Leo's phone. It went to voicemail. She called the hospital demanding information, but she wasn't a family member. They wouldn't tell her anything. She was trapped, a prisoner in her own body, while a world of pain and uncertainty raged outside. Just before midnight, the suite door burst open. Leo stood there, soaked to the bone, his eyes red-rimmed, his face haggard. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. She held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt a fear she had never known. She feared for this man she barely knew, for the son she'd never met. "He's okay," Leo said, his voice cracking. "A concussion, bad one, but he's going to be okay. They're keeping him for observation. My mom is with him." The relief that flooded through Charlotte was so potent, so physical, it almost made her dizzy. It was as if a band around her own chest had been released. She looked at his haunted face and she knew. In that moment she saw him, truly saw him, past the caregiver and the proxy. She saw a man who would move heaven and earth for his son. A man of unwavering loyalty, a man who was the antithesis of every soulless executive she'd ever known. He was different. He walked towards her, his steps unsteady. And then he did something that shattered every barrier she had built. He dropped to his knees beside her bed. It wasn't a sign of submission. It was a sign of exhaustion, of need. He didn't say a word. He just laid his head on the edge of her bed, and his shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. Charlotte lay there, utterly helpless to move, to reach out. She wanted to touch his hair, to tell him it was going to be okay. Instead, she did the only thing she could. She made her voice as soft as it had ever been. "He's going to be fine, Leo. He's a tough kid. He's your son." Her words were simple, but they were the most honest she'd ever spoken. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers. In that gaze there was no pity, no judgment. There was a raw, desperate connection. He wasn't seeing a CEO, a patient, or a problem. He was seeing a fellow human being who had just saved him in his moment of desperation. He reached out and took her hand. The touch was electric. It was the first time another person's skin had touched hers with tenderness since the world had ended. She stared at his strong, work-roughened hand holding hers, and for the first time she didn't feel a prisoner in her body. She felt grounded, seen. The accident was the catalyst. The fear of losing Leo and Eli had shown her exactly what she had been missing: purpose. Her revenge against the board was hollow without someone to share it with, so she shifted her strategy. "The pension fund," she said to him one morning, weeks later, as he read a report to her from her tablet. "It's been mismanaged. I'm going to use it as leverage, but the current board will fight me. They'll try to discredit me." "Let them try," Leo said, his voice firm. "They don't know what you're capable of." It wasn't just corporate warfare anymore. It was the three of them against the world. The culmination was the board meeting. It was a grand affair, held in the ballroom of the company's headquarters to announce the new direction and finally oust Charlotte. But Charlotte was one step ahead. She had used her connections, her cold, calculating logic, and the evidence Leo had helped her gather. As the board members sat in smug satisfaction, a screen flickered to life. It was Charlotte, live from her penthouse. Her face was pale, but her eyes were blazing. She was flanked by Leo, standing resolute behind her, a silent sentinel. "Good afternoon." "Gentlemen," she said, her voice echoing through the speakers, "I believe you have a motion to pass." The room went silent. "Before you do," she continued, a cold smile playing on her lips, "I'd like to remind you of the Statute 14b, which allows a CEO to disband an acting board in the case of proven embezzlement, which I believe you've been doing quite elegantly, Mr. Henderson." She laid out their treachery with surgical precision, their greedy little schemes exposed in the face of the entire company. It was a massacre. The board was decimated. They walked out of the room with their tails between their legs, their careers in ruins. The meeting was over. Charlotte had won. But the victory wasn't in the boardroom. The victory was in her bedroom. Leo looked down at her, his eyes full of a quiet, brilliant triumph. The battle was won, but the war within her was only just beginning to end. "We did it," he whispered. "We did," she said, her voice soft. She realized then that she no longer saw him as her hands. He was her anchor, her tether to the world. He was her hope. She had climbed the mountain, not on her own 2 feet, but on the strength of a single dad who had been too stubborn to leave. The man who had taken control, not of her body, but of her spirit. And in doing so, he had made her whole again. As the cameras clicked and the news of her stunning return spread, she finally allowed herself to feel a sliver of something she had almost forgotten. It wasn't just victory. It was peace. And it was found in the stormy eyes of the man who had seen her at her absolute worst and had refused to let her fall.